The air at the community fair buzzed with a cheerful chaos, a symphony of laughing children, sizzling hot dogs, and the tinny melody of a distant carousel. But for 10-year-old Leo, the entire world had gone silent. All the noise, all the color, all the distraction faded into a muted backdrop. There was only the dog. He was a magnificent German shepherd, seated with a profound stillness beside a uniformed officer. His coat was a rich tapestry of sable and black, his posture radiating a quiet power that seemed to hold the whole park in a state of respectful awe. This was Rex, K-9 officer, and to Leo, he was the most incredible creature he had ever seen. While other kids clamored for balloons or begged for cotton candy, Leo stood rooted to the spot, his gaze locked on the dog's intelligent amber eyes. He watched as the handler, a stern-faced man named Officer Miller, put Rex through his paces. The dog responded to silent hand signals, his movements precise, his focus absolute. There was a story in the slight graying of his muzzle, a history in the barely there scar above his right eye. This wasn't just a dog. He was a warrior, a guardian. Leo's father, David, a man whose smile could charm a room and whose presence was always a comfort, placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "Pretty amazing, huh, sport?" Leo didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too lost in the silent conversation he was having with the dog across the small, roped-off patch of grass. He felt a pull, a strange and powerful connection that resonated deep in his small chest. After the demonstration ended and the small crowd began to disperse, Leo took a hesitant step forward, his father following. They approached Officer Miller, who was giving Rex a drink of water from a collapsible bowl. He's beautiful," Leo managed, his voice barely a whisper. Officer Miller offered a rare, thin smile. "He's one of the best. Aren't you, boy?" He scratched Rex behind the ears, and the dog's tail gave a single, dignified thump against the grass. David chuckled, his easygoing charm on full display. "My son's a huge dog lover. We've been talking about getting one. You've certainly set the bar high." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked from the noble dog to his father's kind face, and the words tumbled out before he could stop them, a fragile, hopeful plea. "Can we adopt that police dog, Dad?" the boy whispered, his eyes wide with a desperate sincerity. It was an innocent question, the kind a child asks without understanding the complexities of the world. David was already starting to formulate a gentle refusal, something about working dogs having a special job. Officer Miller was about to explain that K9s were city property, not pets for the taking. Both men had their prepared, sensible answers ready. But those answers never came. Because as Leo spoke, something unbelievable happened. Rex, who had been placidly accepting his handler's praise, suddenly went rigid. His head lifted. His ears swiveled forward like twin radars locking onto a target. But he wasn't looking at the small, adoring boy. His gaze, sharp and cold as splintered ice, shot past Leo and fixed directly onto his father, David. A low, guttural sound, more a vibration than a growl, rumbled deep in the shepherd's chest. His hackles, the fur along his powerful spine, rose almost imperceptibly. His body tensed, coiled like a spring, a picture of lethal readiness. It was a transformation so swift, so chilling, that it sucked the air right out of the sunny afternoon. Officer Miller saw it. He felt the change through the leash, a sudden, electric tension. His practiced smile vanished. He followed his partner's unblinking stare. He looked from the dog's terrifyingly focused eyes to the face of the charming, handsome man, David. And then, the handler looked back at his dog. He saw the posture, the specific angle of the head, the low, menacing growl, the look in Rex's eyes. It was a look of pure, undiluted recognition. And Miller's face, a face weathered by years on the street, a face that had seen the worst of humanity, went completely, horrifyingly pale. The color drained from his cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. His breath hitched, because he had seen that exact posture, that exact look in his partner's eyes, only once before. And it was on a night that had haunted his dreams for 7 long years. What was happening? Why was this heroic dog looking at a beloved father as if he were a monster? The mystery was just beginning, and the truth, when it finally emerged, would be more devastating than anyone could possibly imagine. What happened next would leave everyone stunned, proving that some heroes have 4 legs and a memory that never, ever forgets. Stay with us because this story will leave you shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Officer Miller's mind was a maelstrom. He yanked the leash, a sharp, reflexive action born of pure shock. Heel, Rex, he commanded, his voice tight and strained. The dog broke his stare, but only just. He moved back to Miller's side, but his body remained a knot of tension, his eyes still darting toward David, who now looked deeply uncomfortable, his charming smile faltering. David shifted his weight, a flicker of something unreadable, annoyance, fear, crossing his features before being smoothed over with a mask of concerned confusion. Is he all right? David asked, forcing a light tone. He put a protective arm around Leo, pulling him back slightly. Maybe he's not used to crowds. Miller couldn't form a coherent sentence. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. That look, it was seared into his memory. He grabbed for an excuse, any excuse. End of a long day. He's tired. We have to go. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned on his heel, pulling a reluctant Rex with him, practically dragging the 75-pound dog away from the father and son. He could feel Leo's heartbroken gaze on his back. He heard the boy's small voice pipe up, "But Dad," before it was cut off by his father's soothing murmur. Miller didn't look back. He couldn't. He needed to get Rex away. He needed to think. Back at the station, the familiar scent of stale coffee and disinfectant did little to calm Miller's frayed nerves. He led Rex to his kennel, the dog's demeanor slowly returning to its usual stoicism, though a low whine escaped him as Miller latched the gate. It was a sound of protest, of unfinished business. Miller leaned his forehead against the cool chain link, his own breathing still ragged. "What was that, boy?" he whispered. "What did you see?" He knew it wasn't just tiredness or crowd anxiety. Rex was a seasoned K-9, unflappable in the face of roaring crowds, gunfire, and chaos. He'd worked political rallies, bomb threats, and tactical raids. A friendly dad at a community fair shouldn't have registered as a threat. But Rex hadn't seen a friendly dad. He'd seen something else entirely. Something from their shared past. Unable to sit still, Miller found himself in the records room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. His fingers, trembling slightly, flipped through the hanging files until he found the one he was looking for, the one he hadn't opened in years. It was thick, worn at the edges, and labeled, Case hashtag 734B, Home Invasion/Aggravated Assault. K-9 injured. His partner on that case was Rex. His old K-9 partner, a different dog, had retired a year prior. Rex was new, brilliant, and at the peak of his abilities. And that night had nearly destroyed him. He pulled the file and sat down at a dusty table, the grim photographs and typed reports a stark contrast to the sunny afternoon he'd just left. He didn't need to read the words. They were etched into his soul. The date, October 12th, 7 years ago. A frantic 911 call from a woman, her voice choked with terror, whispers of an intruder, a man she knew. By the time they'd arrived, the line was dead. Miller and his human partner at the time, Officer Davis, had been first on the scene, with Rex leading the way. The memory flooded back with sickening clarity. The splintered door frame. The smell of rain-soaked earth tracked across the hardwood floors. The overturned lamp. And the sound of Rex, not barking, not growling, but a high, keening cry of distress. They found him in the master bedroom. A young woman, Sarah, was unconscious on the floor, bleeding from a head wound. The intruder was gone, having slipped out a back window just moments before they arrived. And Rex was standing over her, shielding her body with his own. He had a deep gash on his shoulder, but he refused to move. He was whining, nudging her hand with his nose, his eyes filled with a desperate, heartbroken plea. And that was when Miller had seen it. The look. As they tried to get him to move so the paramedics could work, Rex had turned his head toward the open window, toward the direction the attacker had fled. His body had gone rigid. His hackles had risen. A low, guttural growl had torn from his throat. He was staring into the darkness, at the ghost of the man who had done this, with the exact same cold, hate-filled recognition he had just shown to David, Leo's father. Miller's blood ran cold. Could it be? It was impossible. A 7-year-old cold case? David was a respected architect, a volunteer Little League coach, the picture of suburban fatherhood. There was no way. It had to be a coincidence. A trick of the light, a scent on the wind that triggered a false memory in an aging dog. His logical mind, the cop part of his brain, screamed at him that it was a fantasy. But the part of him that was Rex's partner, the part that had seen the dog perform miracles of intuition, that had trusted the dog's nose over eyewitness testimony and won, that part whispered a terrifying question. What if it wasn't a coincidence? He scanned the witness description in the file. Male, approximate 6 foot, medium build, dark hair. Face obscured by shadow and a baseball cap, it was uselessly vague. It could describe half the men in the city, including David. The attacker had been smart, wearing gloves, leaving behind no fingerprints, no DNA. The only real evidence they had was Sarah's testimony when she woke up. She said it was an ex-boyfriend, a man named Mark Renshaw, who had been stalking her. But Renshaw had an ironclad alibi. He'd been on a flight to Chicago, with ticket stubs, credit card receipts, and multiple witnesses to prove it. He was a dead end. The case went cold, a frustrating, painful failure that had gnawed at Miller and his partner Davis for years. It was the case that had earned Rex his scar and a deep-seated trauma that had eventually led to his early retirement from active duty. He was still a part of the unit, used for demonstrations and sent work in controlled environments. But his time on the streets was over. That night had changed him. Miller slammed the file shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. He was chasing ghosts. He was letting a dog's strange reaction spin him into a conspiracy theory about a pillar of the community. He had to let it go. He stood up, ready to put the file away, to forget the whole thing. But as he stood, a single, loose sheet of paper slipped from the folder and drifted to the floor. It was a supplementary evidence log. Most of it was standard: photos, fiber samples, footprint casts. But one line item caught his eye, an item he had completely forgotten about. Item number 27. Torn fabric fragment, dark canvas, recovered from rose bush beneath suspect's exit window. It was a tiny scrap of cloth, snagged from the attacker's jacket as he fled. At the time, it had yielded nothing. But it was still there, logged away in an evidence locker deep in the station's basement. A faint, 7-year-old scent signature, preserved in a sealed plastic bag. A scent that only one witness on Earth might still be able to identify. Meanwhile, in a quiet suburban home, Leo sat on his bed, staring at the small, glossy brochure from the K-9 unit. A heroic photo of Rex was on the cover. Tears welled in his eyes. He didn't understand what had happened. 1 minute, the beautiful dog was calm, and the next, he was angry. And that anger had been directed at his dad. His dad, who was the kindest, gentlest person he knew. David came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. His face was a mask of paternal concern. "Hey, sport. Still thinking about that dog?" Leo nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Why was he mad at you, Dad?" David sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "He wasn't mad at me, Leo. Police dogs are trained to be very protective. Sometimes they get confused in big crowds. That officer, he seemed a little on edge. The dog was probably just feeding off his handler's stress. It's nothing to worry about." He smiled his easy, reassuring smile. "It probably wasn't meant to be. That dog has an important job. We'll find you a different dog, I promise. One we can raise from a puppy. Won't that be fun?" Leo looked at his father. He wanted to believe him. He always believed him. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He had seen the look in Rex's eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something older and darker. And he couldn't shake the feeling that the dog knew something that nobody else did. Days turned into a week, but Officer Miller couldn't shake the image from his mind. Rex's stare, David's faltering smile. It was a discordant note in the symphony of his well-ordered life. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself he was a fool, a cop on the verge of burnout seeing conspiracies in the park. He'd even consulted the department's animal behaviorist, a clinical woman who spoke in terms of stimulus response and trigger stacking. She'd suggested Rex might have associated a cologne David was wearing with a negative memory, or that the specific pitch of David's voice resembled someone from his past. Plausible, logical, and Miller's gut told him it was all wrong. The bond between a handler and his K-9 is something words can't fully capture. It's a silent language of shared breath, of subtle shifts in weight, of a trust that transcends species. Miller had been partnered with Rex for 5 years before the dog's retirement from active duty. He knew the dog's every mood, every signal. He knew the difference between a territorial bark, a playful yip, and a warning growl. What he had heard at the fair was none of those. It was an accusation. It was memory given voice. His off-the-books investigation began small, almost pathetic. He spent hours on the city's social media pages, looking at public photos of David. He found him everywhere, cutting the ribbon at a new community center, coaching Leo's soccer team, smiling in a family portrait with his wife, who had passed away from an illness a few years prior. He was, by all accounts, a model citizen, a grieving widower who had dedicated his life to his son. There wasn't a single crack in the facade. The man seemed perfect. Too perfect. Frustrated, Miller decided to visit his old partner, Frank Davis. Davis had retired a few years after the home invasion case, a knee injury and a heavy dose of cynicism pushing him out the door. Miller found him in his garage, surrounded by the guts of a vintage motorcycle, the air thick with the smell of oil and regret. Case 734B, Miller said, leaning against the workbench. Davis didn't even look up, his hands still working a wrench. What about it? We kicked that dead horse for 2 years, Miller. It's gone. The guy, Renshaw, had an alibi made of titanium. Case closed, unofficially. I think I might have found the guy, Miller said, the words sounding flimsy even to his own ears. Davis finally stopped and looked up, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. His eyes were tired. Yeah? You get a deathbed confession? Find a fingerprint on the moon. Rex found him. Davis let out a short, harsh laugh. Rex? The dog? What? Did he point him out in a lineup? Miller, you need a vacation. Rex is a great dog, but he's still a dog. He's old. He's got trauma. He's probably seeing monsters in every shadow. He saw a man, Frank, at the community fair. A guy named David. The dog reacted. He reacted. The same way he did that night, when the perp had just fled. The exact same posture, the same growl. I've never seen it since. Not until that day. Davis sighed. The cynicism etched deep in the lines around his eyes. So a dog growled at a guy? Happens 1,000 times a day. Did you get a plate number? Did the guy confess? Did he have the victim's stolen jewelry in his pocket? No. You have a dog's gut feeling. That's not evidence, Miller. It's a ghost story. Let it go. For your own good. Miller left Davis's garage feeling dejected, the cold water of his ex-partner's logic dousing the fragile flame of his suspicion. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe he was losing it. But the ghost story wouldn't let him go. That night, he took Rex out for a late-night walk around the quiet station grounds. The dog, usually content to sniff at the edges of the manicured lawn, was restless. He kept looking up at Miller, a low whine in his throat, his intelligent eyes asking a question. Miller sat down on a cold stone bench, and Rex immediately rested his heavy head on his handler's knee, looking up at him. In that moment, Miller made a decision. He would trust the dog. He would trust his partner over the cynical logic of a burnt-out cop and the sterile explanations of a behaviorist. He owed it to Rex. He owed it to the woman whose life was shattered that night. His new plan was risky, unprofessional, and could get him fired. But he had to know. He found an excuse, a follow-up K-9 awareness session for Leo's school. He pitched it as a way to make up for the abrupt ending at the fair, a special treat for the kids. The school principal loved the idea, and David, eager to smooth over his son's disappointment, readily agreed to be a parent chaperone. He wanted to show Leo that there was nothing to be afraid of. It was the perfect trap. The day of the presentation arrived, gray and overcast. Miller felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He had Rex in the back of his cruiser, the dog sensing his handler's tension, sitting alert and watchful. This couldn't be another confrontation. It had to be subtle. He needed to observe. He set up in the school gymnasium. The kids were thrilled, their excited chatter echoing off the high ceilings. Leo was in the front row, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. David stood at the back with the other parent chaperones, his arms crossed, a placid smile on his face. He looked every bit the supportive father. Miller began the demonstration, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He had Rex perform simple commands, finding a hidden set of keys, demonstrating his focus. The dog was a professional, obeying every command, his attention locked on Miller. Then came the critical part of the plan. Now, one of the most amazing things about these dogs is their nose, Miller explained to the children. They can smell things we can't even imagine. They can tell people apart just by their unique scent. He asked for 3 parent volunteers to help with the demonstration. A cheerful mom and another dad stepped forward. Miller looked toward the back of the gym. Mr. Jennings? David? How about you be our third? David's smile didn't waver. He seemed almost eager to participate, to prove a point. Of course. Happy to help. Miller had the 3 parents stand in a line. He gave each of them an identical, sterile gauze pad. I just need you to hold this in your hand for 30 seconds, he instructed. He then collected the pads, careful not to touch them himself, and placed each one under an identical orange cone several yards away. The test was simple. He would give Rex a scent article from one of the volunteers, and the dog would identify the matching cone. It was a standard, almost boring demonstration. But today it was everything. He started with the mom. He let Rex sniff a spare pad she had held, and the dog trotted off, nudging the correct cone with his nose in seconds. The children clapped. He repeated it with the other dad. Another perfect success. Then, it was David's turn. Miller's hand was slick with sweat as he picked up the final gauze pad, the one David had held. He knelt in front of Rex. He didn't let the dog sniff it right away. Instead, he looked into his partner's eyes. Easy boy, he whispered. Just find it. Vinden, the search command. He held the pad out. Rex lowered his head. He inhaled once. And the world stopped. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a bark. It was a reaction far more terrifying. The dog flinched back from the gauze pad as if it had been a hot coal. A pained, confused yelp escaped his throat. He looked at the pad. Then his head snapped up, his gaze flying across the gymnasium, past the cones, past the children, and locking directly onto David. And then Rex began to tremble. It wasn't the shiver of a cold dog, but a deep, violent tremor that shook his entire body. He backed away from Miller, his tail tucked, his ears flat against his head. He started to whine, a high, piercing sound of pure distress. It was the same sound Miller had heard in that dark bedroom 7 years ago. The sound of a protector who had failed. The sound of a witness confronted with a ghost. The children fell silent, their happy chatter replaced by a confused hush. The teachers looked on, alarmed. Leo stood up, his face pale with worry. What's wrong with him? David's smile was gone. His face was a thundercloud of fury and something else, panic. This is ridiculous, he said, his voice loud in the silent gym. Your dog is unstable. He's scaring the children. But Miller wasn't looking at David. He was looking at Rex. The dog was cowering, a powerful animal reduced to a state of abject terror by a simple scent on a piece of cloth. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't a threat. It was trauma, raw, visceral, and undeniable. In that moment, all of Miller's doubts evaporated, replaced by a chilling certainty. David wasn't just a suspect. He wasn't a coincidence. He was the monster from that rainy night. And Rex didn't just recognize him. He was terrified of him. The dog who feared nothing feared this man. And Miller finally understood why. The attacker that night hadn't just injured Rex with a weapon. He had broken his spirit. And the scent on that gauze pad had just thrown Rex right back into that moment of pain and failure. Demonstration's over, Miller announced, his voice like stone. He moved to his dog's side, kneeling, murmuring soothing words. He clipped the leash back on. He had his answer. The ghost story was real. And now, he had to prove it. The drive back to the station was a blur. Miller's mind raced, replaying the scene in the gymnasium over and over. Rex's terror was the most damning evidence he'd ever witnessed, yet it was inadmissible, intangible. A dog's fear wasn't probable cause. He couldn't get a warrant based on a canine's panic attack. Davis was right. It was a ghost story. But now he'd seen the ghost. He burst into the captain's office, a man named Henderson who valued protocol above all else. Miller, breathless and impassioned, laid it all out. The reaction at the fair, the cold case file, the dog's terror at the scent demonstration. Henderson listened patiently, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Miller finished, the captain leaned back in his chair and sighed. Miller, I respect you, and I respect that dog. But you've got nothing. You have a theory based on an animal's behavior. an animal with a known history of trauma related to a single event. A good defense attorney would paint Rex as an unreliable witness in a heartbeat. They'd say you coached the reaction. You're too close to this. Sir, I saw it. I know what I saw. I'm sure you do, Henderson said, his tone softening slightly. But the justice system doesn't run on what a cop knows. It runs on what he can prove. You go after a man like David Jennings with this? A respected community figure? You'd better have more than a trembling dog. You'll ruin his life, and you'll end your career. I'm ordering you to stand down. Let it go. That's an order. Miller walked out of the office feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Stand down. Let the man who brutalized a woman and shattered his partner's spirit walk free, coaching Little League and playing the part of the perfect father. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow. He felt a surge of rage, not at Henderson, but at the system, at the rules that protected monsters who were smart enough to hide in plain sight. He went to Rex's kennel. The dog was lying down, but his head lifted the moment Miller approached. The trembling had stopped, but the light in his eyes was gone. He looked defeated. Miller opened the gate and sat on the concrete floor, pulling the big dog into his arms. Rex leaned against him, a heavy, solid weight of shared history. I'm sorry, boy, Miller whispered into his fur. I'm so sorry. I believe you. I don't know what to do. For 2 days, Miller followed orders. He went through the motions of his job, running training drills, filing paperwork, his mind 1,000 miles away. The captain's words echoed in his head. You'd better have more. He needed something concrete. Something that connected David Jennings, the charming architect, to Mark Renshaw, the stalker with the ironclad alibi. He started digging into Renshaw again. The man had disappeared off the face of the earth after being cleared. No social media, no credit history, nothing. It was as if he'd vanished. On a hunch, Miller ran a deep background check on David Jennings. He found the usual things: birth certificate, college degrees, marriage license. His late wife, Elena, had died of cancer 3 years ago. It was all clean. But then he found something else, buried in a digital archive of old university records. A student photo from 15 years ago, a young David Jennings, smiling from a debate club picture. He had a different haircut, no trace of the distinguished gray at his temples, but it was him. And the name under the picture wasn't David Jennings. It was David Renshaw. Miller felt a jolt, as if he'd touched a live wire. David and Mark Renshaw were brothers. The pieces started clicking into place with terrifying speed. He pulled up the file for case #734B again. The victim, Sarah, had said her attacker was her ex-boyfriend, Mark. Everyone had focused on Mark. But what if she was wrong? What if it wasn't Mark, but someone who looked like him? Someone who knew his schedule, who knew he'd be on a plane and unable to defend himself. A brother. Why? Miller pulled Sarah's original statement. She mentioned that Mark had a brother, David, who had always been odd, overprotective. He'd sometimes show up unannounced. He'd told her once that Mark didn't deserve her. At the time, it had been dismissed as irrelevant family drama. But now, it was the whole story. David wasn't stalking Sarah for his brother. He was obsessed with her himself. He'd used his brother's identity as a cover, committing the crime knowing full well that Mark would be the prime suspect and that Mark had the perfect alibi. It was a brilliant, twisted plan. After the investigation cleared his brother, David had quietly changed his last name to his mother's maiden name, Jennings, moved to a new city, and built a new life, burying his violent past under a mountain of good deeds. Miller now had a motive. He had a connection, but he still had no physical proof. It would laugh him out of the room. He needed one more piece. One final, undeniable link. His mind went back to the evidence locker, to item number 27, the torn fabric fragment. It was his only shot, 1,000,000 to 1 chance. He had to get Rex and David in the same room with that piece of evidence. But how? David would never agree to another meeting. He was spooked. Miller had shown his hand at the school. The answer, when it came, was both simple and heartbreaking. He had to use the boy. He had to use Leo's love for the dog as bait. It felt manipulative and dirty, but the alternative, letting David get away with it, was unthinkable. He called David, his voice carefully neutral. He apologized for Rex's behavior at the school, blaming it on the dog's trauma and his own poor judgment. Then he laid the trap. Rex is being officially retired from the force. Miller lied. He's going to a quiet home out of state. I know Leo was very attached to him, and I feel terrible about how things have gone. I was wondering if, before he leaves tomorrow, Leo might want to come by the K-9 facility to say a proper goodbye. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Miller could hear David thinking, weighing the risks. But the pull of maintaining his image as the perfect, caring father was too strong. Denying his son this final goodbye would look suspicious, cold. It would raise questions. "I think he'd like that very much," David finally said, his voice smooth as silk. "Thank you, officer. That's very thoughtful of you." "My pleasure," Miller said, feeling a chill despite the warmth in his own voice. "We'll see you tomorrow at 10. The stage was set. Miller got Henderson's reluctant, off-the-record permission. He called in 2 plainclothes detectives, telling them to be on standby, out of sight. Then he went to the evidence locker. He signed out the small, sealed bag containing item number 27. It was a tiny scrap of dark, heavy-duty canvas, no bigger than his thumb. It smelled of nothing but dust and time. But to a nose 100 million times more sensitive than a human's, it might as well be a signed confession. This was it. The ghost story was about to have its final chapter. He was betting his career, a boy's image of his father, and a 7-year-old quest for justice on the memory of a dog. The K-9 training facility was quiet when David's car pulled into the parking lot. The sky was a sheet of iron gray, threatening a rain that never came, mirroring the cold tension in Officer Miller's chest. He watched from his office window as David and Leo got out of the car. Leo was subdued, his shoulders slumped, the joy of seeing Rex again tempered by the sadness of the impending final goodbye. David, on the other hand, was a picture of calm composure, a comforting hand on his son's back, guiding him toward the entrance. It was a performance, and a masterful one at that. Miller had prepared the scene with meticulous care. He'd chosen a large, empty training room. In the center, he placed a low table. On the table were 3 metal tins, the kind used for scent detection training. One was empty. One contained a piece of canvas from a new dog training dummy. The third, its lid slightly ajar, contained the small, sealed evidence bag holding the fabric scrap from the rose bush, item number 27. 2 of Miller's most trusted colleagues, Detectives Evans and Chun, were in an adjoining observation room, watching through a one-way mirror. The air in the facility was thick with an unspoken anticipation. Rex was waiting with another handler in a kennel down the hall, out of sight and scent range. He was calm, but Miller knew that the dog's placid exterior was a thin veil over the storm of memory that lay dormant within. "Mr. Jennings, Leo, thanks for coming," Miller said, meeting them at the door. His voice was even, professional. He was an actor now, too. "Thank you for arranging this, officer," David said, his smile as polished as ever. "It means a lot to Leo." Leo didn't speak. He just looked around, his eyes searching for the dog. "Where's Rex?" "He'll be out in a minute, buddy," Miller said gently. "First, I was just setting up a little scent game. It's how we keep the dog sharp. You want to watch?" He guided them toward the center of the room, positioning them a few feet from the table, exactly where he wanted them. David stood with his arms crossed, an indulgent but wary observer. He thought this was about him appeasing his son. He had no idea this was his trial. "The goal is for the dog to find a specific scent, even one that's very, very old," Miller explained, his words directed at Leo but intended for David. He walked over to the table and casually opened the lids of all 3 tins. The faint, dusty scent of the 7-year-old fabric scrap was now free in the air, a silent, invisible witness. "All right," Miller said, speaking into his shoulder radio. "Bring him in." A moment later, the door opened. The other handler led Rex into the room. The dog entered with his head high, his tail giving a slight, inquisitive wag. His eyes immediately found Leo, and a soft whine escaped his throat. He pulled toward the boy, his entire demeanor one of gentle affection. "Okay, Rex, just a minute," Miller commanded, his voice a low anchor. He took the leash from the other handler, who then quietly exited the room. Rex's focus shifted to Miller, his training kicking in. He sat, his gaze locked on his partner, awaiting a command. But then, the air in the room changed. Rex's nostrils began to twitch. He lifted his nose, sampling the air, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was processing the cocktail of scents, the sterile concrete, the rubber of the training mats, Miller's familiar smell, Leo's youthful energy, David's cloying cologne, and something else. Something faint. A ghost of a scent from a nightmare. His body tensed. He took a step back, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of that terrible, familiar odor. His gaze swept past David without pausing. The scent was in the air, but it wasn't strong enough. It was a question, not an answer. "Okay, Rex," Miller said, his heart hammering. This was the moment of truth. "Vinden, the search command." Rex crept forward, his movements low and cautious. He approached the table, his nose working furiously. He sniffed the first tin, the empty one, and dismissed it. He moved to the second, the one with the new canvas, gave it a cursory sniff, and ignored it. Then he came to the third tin, the one with the evidence bag. He lowered his head. He inhaled deeply. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A choked, guttural sound ripped from his throat. He leaped back from the table as if he'd been struck, his paws scrambling on the smooth concrete. He stared at the tin, his body trembling, the fur on his back standing up in a rigid line. He remembered. The smell of the jacket. The smell of the man in the shadows. The smell of pain. But it was what happened next that sealed David's fate. Rex's head snapped up from the tin. His eyes, blazing with a terrifying fusion of fear and fury, scanned the room. They passed over Miller. They passed over Leo. And they landed on David Jennings. And they stopped. In the dog's mind, the faint scent from the tin and the stronger scent of the man standing before him merged into one. The ghost in the air suddenly had a face. The puzzle pieces of a 7-year-old trauma slammed into place. This was him. This was the monster from the dark room. A growl started deep in Rex's chest. It was not the sound of a scared or confused animal. It was a sound of pure, condensed hatred. A sound of judgment. It grew in volume, a low, rumbling thunder that vibrated through the floor. The dog lowered his head, his lips curling back to reveal a fearsome array of white teeth. He took a slow, deliberate step toward David. Then another. Every muscle in his body was corded with tension, a weapon system coming online. David's mask of composure finally, irrevocably shattered. His face went ashen, his eyes wide with stark terror. He saw the look in the dog's eyes. It was a look of recognition. The dog knew. The goddamn dog knew. "Get it away from me," he shrieked, his voice a high-pitched squeal of panic. He stumbled backward, his hands held up as if to ward off a phantom. "It's crazy. It should be put down." Leo stood frozen, his face a canvas of horror and confusion. He looked from the snarling, advancing dog to his father's terrified, contorted face. "Dad? What's happening?" In his panic, David made his final, fatal mistake. He saw Leo standing between him and the door. He saw his escape route. He lunged, not for the door, but for his son. "Leo, come on," he yelled, his hand reaching out to grab the boy, to use him as a shield, a pawn. It was the last move he would ever make as a free man. The instant David moved toward Leo, Rex exploded into action. The years of training, the protective instincts, the deep well of loyalty to the innocent, it all coalesced into a single, fluid motion. He launched himself forward, not to attack David, but to intercept him. With a grace that defied his size, he placed his body squarely between the lunging father and the terrified boy. He didn't bite. He didn't snap. He simply became a wall of muscle and fur, a living barrier. He stood over Leo, his back to the boy, his blazing eyes locked on David. The growl now a deafening roar that promised retribution if he took one more step. The door to the observation room burst open. Detectives Evans and Chun flooded in, their weapons drawn but held in a low, ready position. "David Renshaw," Evans commanded, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. "You are under arrest." The name hit David like a physical blow. Renshaw, not Jennings. They knew. It was over. All the lies, the years of careful construction, the perfect facade, it had all been dismantled by a dog's memory. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant despair. He sank to his knees, his hands slowly rising in surrender. Amidst the chaos, Miller's only focus was on the two figures at the center of it all, the heroic dog and the shattered boy. He knelt beside them. Rex, sensing the threat was neutralized, finally quieted, the deep growl subsiding into a low, watchful rumble. He nudged Leo's hand with his nose, a soft, reassuring touch. Leo was crying, silent tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand the name the detective had used, or the crime, or any of it. He only understood one thing. He had just seen the man he called Dad try to use him, and he had just been saved by the dog he had wanted to adopt. He wrapped his small arms around Rex's thick neck and buried his face in the dog's fur, his body shaking with sobs. Rex stood perfectly still, absorbing the boy's grief, a stoic, furry anchor in a world that had just been torn apart. The hero had not only delivered justice, he had begun the long, painful process of healing its youngest victim. The aftermath was a quiet storm. The arrest of David Jennings, formerly Renshaw, sent shockwaves through the community. The story that emerged was uglier than anyone could have imagined. His obsession with his brother's girlfriend, Sarah, the calculated, brutal attack, the years spent living a lie, hiding behind a mask of civic duty and fatherly love. Sarah, when notified, broke down in tears of relief. The ghost that had haunted her for 7 years finally had a face and a name. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived, delivered by the one witness who could never be cross-examined, a German shepherd with a flawless memory. But for Leo, the world had been irrevocably broken. His father was not the hero he had believed him to be. He was a monster. The foundations of his young life had crumbled to dust. He was placed in the temporary care of Child Protective Services while they located his maternal grandparents, who lived several states away. He was quiet, withdrawn, a ghost in his own life. The only time anyone saw a flicker of the old Leo was when Officer Miller would visit, sometimes bringing photos or a short video of Rex. Miller was hailed as a hero, but he felt anything but. He felt like a man who had been forced to detonate a bomb in a child's life to expose a hidden evil. The image of Leo's small, sobbing form clinging to Rex was burned into his mind. He knew he had done the right thing, the only thing he could do, but the cost felt immense. Rex was the true hero. The department officially recognized his incredible contribution, and his story became a quiet legend within the force. But his work was done. The trauma that had been brought so violently to the surface had taken its toll. The slight trembling in his paws would sometimes return in his sleep. It was clear he could never work again, not even for demonstrations. He was officially, fully retired. The question became what to do with him. There was a waiting list of former officers who would gladly give the hero dog a loving home. But Miller knew where Rex belonged. He saw the unbreakable, unspoken bond that had formed in that gymnasium, a bond forged in a moment of terror and protection. A boy who had lost his protector, and a dog who had found someone new to protect. It took weeks of paperwork, of cutting through red tape, of calling in every favor he was owed. He argued that Rex was not just a dog, but a key part of Leo's recovery. He was a therapy animal of the highest order, a living symbol that even when the worst happens, there are still heroes. He made his case to his captain, to the city council, and finally, to Leo's grandparents, a kind, elderly couple who were still reeling from the shock of their son-in-law's secret life. He showed them the video from the training room. He showed them Leo's face lighting up at the mere mention of Rex's name. That dog saved him in more ways than one, Miller told them, his voice thick with emotion. He needs Rex. And I think Rex needs him, too. The day came a month later. Miller drove for 10 hours, the cruiser's cab quiet except for the soft panting of the big dog in the back. Rex seemed to know this was no ordinary trip. He sat alert, watching the world fly by, a sense of purpose in his intelligent eyes. They arrived at a small, neat house with a big, fenced-in backyard. Leo's grandparents met them on the porch. Leo was standing just inside the screen door, hesitant, a shadow of his former self. Miller opened the back door of the cruiser. "Okay, boy," he said softly. "You're home." Rex hopped out. He looked at the new house, the new yard, the new people. Then his eyes found the screen door. He saw the small boy standing there. A soft whine escaped his throat. He took a tentative step forward, then another. Leo slowly pushed the screen door open and stepped out onto the porch. He looked at the magnificent dog, the hero who had saved him. Rex stopped at the bottom of the steps, sitting patiently, his tail giving a slow, gentle thump against the ground. He was waiting for an invitation. A watery smile touched Leo's lips, the first real smile his grandparents had seen in a month. "Rex," he whispered. It was all the dog needed. Rex bounded up the steps, not with the force of a police dog, but with the gentle joy of a friend. He didn't jump. He just pushed his big, noble head under Leo's hand, nudging him, asking for the touch he had been missing. Leo knelt, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck, burying his face in the familiar, comforting scent of his fur. This time, there were no sobs, just a quiet, profound sense of peace, of coming home. Miller stood back, a lump in his throat, watching the scene. The boy who had innocently asked to adopt a police dog had gotten his wish, but in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. The whisper at the fair had set in motion a chain of events that had exposed a terrible lie but forged an unbreakable truth. In the years that followed, Rex was never a police dog again. He was just Rex. He was a playmate who chased balls in the backyard until his old bones ached. He was a warm presence at the foot of Leo's bed, chasing away nightmares. He was a silent confidant, a furry shoulder to cry on. He was the guardian who had walked out of a boy's darkest day and into the rest of his life. The scar above his eye remained, a reminder of the warrior he had been. But the haunted look was gone, replaced by the soft, contented gaze of a dog who was cherished, who was loved, who had fulfilled his final, most important duty. He had not just brought a criminal to justice. He had restored a child's faith in the existence of heroes. And in a quiet backyard, far from the sirens and the danger, the boy and his dog healed together, proving that the deepest bonds are not defined by blood, but by a loyalty that sees the truth, a courage that protects the innocent, and a love that asks for nothing in return. This incredible story reminds us that animals possess an intuition, a sense of truth, that we humans often overlook. They see past the masks we wear and look directly into our hearts. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a keeper of truth, a furry angel who brought light into the darkest of places. His loyalty to a boy he barely knew stands as a testament to the pure, unconditional love that animals offer so freely. What do you think is the most powerful lesson from Rex's story? Let me know in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales of animal heroism. Your support helps us bring these amazing stories to the world.